We have been going through the book of Matthew, looking at Jesus and his disciples, the interactions, teaching, and correction that Jesus would bring to his disciples, and asking what was he instilling in them, and then how do those lessons translate to us today as his current day disciples. We find ourselves at the start of Matthew chapter 18. I'm reading from the English Standard Version, verses 1 through 6. It reads, "At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them, and said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea.'" These are some strong words from Christ here, and we need to value them and take them with the importance that they carry, which is quite a bit. The disciples are asking this question, firstly, of who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now the answer is God, right? Is Christ, is our King. But Jesus actually kind of answers them in an interesting way. Almost seems that he ignores their question to some degree. They ask this question, and maybe, Peter is hoping that he's going to say, "Well, you, Peter, you're going to be the greatest," right? Or something along those lines. But Jesus doesn't do that. In fact, he doesn't name any of them. What he does is he calls a child, and he puts the child in their midst, and then he uses the child, this little boy, as an example for them. When we think about who is the greatest, right, we often ask that question, and then we start to put value on people based on a number of things. What do they bring to the table? What special skills do they have? If you can think about at school, if there was a group project being done, you might have had two ways of thinking. You might have thought to yourself, how can I be with my friends for this group project? Or you might have thought, how can I be with the smart kid? How can I be with the one who brings an extra understanding or creativity or something to the table to make my grade that much greater? Or you can think about, say, and people have talked about this before, this idea of everyone living on a collective piece of property, right? And then the question is, well, what does that person bring to the table? If you watch any apocalyptic movies, there's someone who's a doctor, and there's a tradesman, and there's a hunter, and there's all these different things that people bring to the table that gives them a sense of value. And then the question comes, well, who's the most important? Is the hunter more important because he brings food? Is the doctor important because he's able to keep people in good health and find medicine? Is the builder important because he provides structure? And there's all these different things and whatnot. And so we're prone to this as humans, to try to figure out, where do I land value-wise? You play a sport, and there's two captains, right? And they're picking people for each team, and they look at the line and they say, all right, this person brings the best to the table. I'm going to pick them. And then, okay, well, that person's second best, so he'll pick them. And then we go back and forth trying to get the most valuable team that we can. So the disciples kind of come with this question. Jesus, who's the most important? Who's the best in the kingdom of heaven? Christ doesn't name any of them. He doesn't look at them and think, well, you can do this, but you're pretty good at that. You're great with money and all these other things. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, he calls a child before them. A child who's dependent, who really doesn't bring anything to the table. In fact, they require things. They're dependent upon their parents. They're dependent upon people to care for them and to provide food for them and to clean them and dress them and make sure they're healthy and all these other things. If you've ever gone on a walk, you go and you walk the First Lake trails, and it's a nice walk. You get a good pace going and you see the scenery and all that stuff. Then you do the walk again, but you bring a child with you. you don't cover as much ground. You move slower, and sometimes the kid gets tired and you got to pick them up and carry them. And sometimes they're saying, "Oh, I'm hungry," and so you get out a snack, or they're thirsty, or all of a sudden they say, "I need to go to the washroom." And you're thinking, "Do I know anyone that lives close to here? Because there's no public washrooms," or "Can we make it back to the car?" or whatever it is. There's this sense of dependence. And Jesus says to them, "You must become like this child to enter the kingdom of heaven." That it's like that that gives you value. And there's this idea here, not that we're to become childish, as in the sense of, silly and whatnot, or anything like that, but that we're to be childlike in our dependence upon God. That we realize that we rely on God. That we say, "Lord, I am nothing, I bring nothing to the table. Use me, and that I would be for your purposes, and that I would be dependent upon you." And that we would see that. That we wouldn't look to, how can I build up my own name? How can I make myself seem more important in the kingdom of heaven? But how can I make God seem more important to those around me? How can I be a blessing to those around me? How can I have a faith and an understanding? And we see that with children, don't we? We see that they are dependent upon us, and they're dependent upon others to help them. But they also just have this trusting sense, right? Like sometimes we'll find ourselves in a problem and we'll be racking our brain about, how can I get out of this solution? Or how can I get a solution to this problem? How can I get this fixed? When a child finds themselves in a problem, do you know what they do? They say, "Daddy, Mommy, come solve this for me. Come help me." And they do that. And I say things to my daughter, right? My daughter's now 5 and time is going way too quick. And the other day I said to her, "You need to stop growing. Slow down with the growing, because I miss my little kid," all right? And her response, and it's always this response, and I love it, is she says, "Daddy, you know I can't stop growing. God is growing me." And there's just this trusting faith. There's just this trust that God is going to take care. God is growing me. God is watching out for me. When she gets a bruise on her knee or a scrape from falling in the playground and it starts to scab over and heal, she says, "God is healing me." There's just this sense of reliance and faith that a child of God has in her Heavenly Father. And we, as adults, sometimes can miss that. We can miss the mark. We come to a problem and we rack our brains and we get stressed and we think about, how can I figure this out? Or we start to think about our own value and we think, man, I don't really bring anything to the table. And the child just knows that they're loved by their father. They're loved by their mother, right? We need to look at God and know that we're loved by Him, not because we bring some sort of value to the table, but because He loves us. Then Jesus says some very strong words. He says, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." So there's this idea of our care towards others as a signal of how we care about Christ. And so we should treat other people with love because that's what He wants us to do. But then He goes on, "But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." That's a strong statement. It would be better for you to tie bricks or a stone and to go jump in the harbor and drown yourself. That would be better than the judgment that you will receive if you lead one of these little ones into sin. And so, what's the message there? Well, pastors, teachers, youth leaders, parents, older siblings, you have a responsibility for those who are in your care, the little ones who love God, to lead them in the ways of God, not to allow or not to push them towards the world, not to lead them to sin, but that you would continually drive them closer and closer to God and care for them and love them because God loves them. And there's this sign here that's saying, if you lead this little one into sin, the wrath that you will face from God is very harsh, but it's just. And so watch that. So parents who are watching this, grandparents who are watching this, teachers, volunteers, leaders, whatever you are, to some capacity, you affect the little children of this church. When we do a baby dedication, for example, right? And we're not just dedicating a baby, but we're dedicating a person. There's this statement that we say to the parents. Are you going to raise this child up in the ways of God? Are you going to look out for them and provide for them and care for them and love them? Then there's a charge to the congregation, because it takes a village. To some degree, you are responsible for little children who love God. Do not lead those people into sin. Care for them, cherish them, draw them closer to God, because that's what He wants us to do. And we have been entrusted with one of the greatest responsibilities. And if you find that you have failed in that task, if you have led these people into sin, the judgment you will face is more severe than tying a stone around yourself and jumping into the sea. So, it's a harsh note to end on, isn't it? But we have a great responsibility. Don't take it lightly. Value your children and love them. And the most loving thing you can do for that child is to raise them in the ways of God. I hope that is helpful to you today. I hope that you look into your own life and ask, Lord, how can I humble myself more, that I would be dependent upon you more and more each day? Love you guys. Have a great week.